At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law stood up in the middle of the church and shouted, "You're humiliating the entire family by wearing that cheap dress." Every head turned toward me, and in an instant, the solemn silence became a public trial. Before I take you deeper into this story, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been humiliated at the very moment you needed compassion the most? Share your feelings in the comments below, and tell me which part of the world you're watching from. And if this kind of life story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another tale that cuts straight to the heart. My name is Margaret Coleman, 68 years old, a retired English teacher, and now a widow living in Florida. My husband Robert, a Navy veteran with a booming laugh, lay in the flag-draped coffin before me. 45 years of marriage reduced to folded cloth and faded photographs. I had chosen my dress carefully, understated, dignified, the kind Robert always said made me look like the first lady of his heart. But to Jessica, my 32-year-old daughter-in-law, that dress was nothing but ammunition. With her hair lacquered in place and designer heels tapping against the marble floor, she turned the sanctuary into her stage. How humiliating. The whole family should be ashamed, she sneered, pointing straight at me. The air shifted. Whispers rippled through the pews. Some people looked away in pity, others smirked, and a few shook their heads. My best friend Helen, sitting a few rows behind me, clenched her fists, but she knew speaking up now would only fan the flames. My son, David, Jessica's husband, stared down at the floor, silent as always when his wife unleashed her cruelty. His silence hurt more than Jessica's words. I sat perfectly still, my hands locked tight in my lap, my throat burning with the effort of swallowing rage. To everyone else, I must have looked like a broken old widow too fragile to defend herself. But behind my teary eyes and trembling lips was a secret smile. Jessica thought she had stripped me of dignity on the most painful day of my life. She thought I was nothing but a pitiful old woman in a bargain bin dress. What she didn't know was that the dress she mocked had been hand-stitched in Paris, worth more than her annual salary. What she didn't know was that she worked for me, that the paycheck she bragged about came from the very hand she now tried to humiliate. She believed she was destroying me. In reality, she was digging her own grave. Because silence is not always weakness. Sometimes silence is the sharpening of a blade. The words Jessica hurled at me still echoed in my ears long after the funeral ended, but they did not wound me the way she imagined. They were not daggers through my heart. They were mirrors reflecting her arrogance, her ignorance, and her smallness in a world she thought she owned. I left the church that afternoon with my head bowed, not because I was broken, but because sometimes the best way to win a war is to let your enemy believe they've already won the first battle. The mourners watched me walk slowly to my car, a weathered Ford sedan that coughed each time I turned the key. Jessica laughed behind me loud enough for the cousins to hear. See, even her car looks like it came from a junkyard. I could feel the heat of their eyes, their whispers feeding off her cruelty. What none of them knew was that tucked safely behind the garage door of my modest apartment building sat a Bentley, a Mercedes S-Class, and a pearl white Porsche, all gleaming like caged secrets, waiting for their moment. Yes, I lived in a simple 2-bedroom apartment near the Florida coastline with peeling paint on the balcony rail and a leaky faucet in the kitchen. My neighbors believed I was just another widow surviving on a teacher's pension. They invited me for bingo nights, and I went smiling, listening, blending in. It was a role I played so well that even my own children believed it. But behind the ordinary facade lay a truth that only Robert and I ever fully shared. We were not middle-class survivors. We were architects of an empire. For decades, Robert and I had quietly built a chain of luxury boutiques that stretched across multiple states. We began with one small shop tucked in a downtown corner where I hemmed dresses at midnight and Robert balanced ledgers by dawn. The brand grew multiplied and flourished under our relentless care. Yet to the world, even to our children, we remained the Colemans, humble, quiet, unassuming. In my closet at home behind sliding mirrored doors hung over 200 designer gowns, many stitched by the hands of Parisian artisans I had personally commissioned. The black dress Jessica spat upon at the funeral cost $75,000. Its mother-of-pearl buttons alone were worth more than the diamond studs she flaunted in her ears. And yet when she pointed at me in the chapel, her voice dripping disdain, I did not correct her. I did not rise to my own defense. Because silence was my greatest weapon. Robert always told me, Maggie, don't waste bullets on small targets. Let them talk. Let them show who they are. Then when the time comes, you don't have to pull the trigger, they'll have already lit the fuse themselves. Jessica had lit the fuse that day. Every word, every smirk, every gesture she made before family and friends was more revealing than anything I could have spoken. She thought she was elevating herself by pushing me down, but in reality, she was building the scaffold from which her own reputation would hang. That evening, after the last casserole dish was collected and the house grew quiet, I slipped off my cheap dress and hung it carefully in the cedar-lined wardrobe. I poured myself a glass of Bordeaux from a bottle Robert and I had bought in France decades earlier, a bottle worth $5,000, but hidden in a plain kitchen cabinet next to boxed wine. The irony almost made me laugh. Sitting there, the sea breeze drifting through the cracked window, I thought of Jessica's words again. Not with pain, but with precision. Each insult was a clue, a breadcrumb leading me toward the truth of who she really was, a woman intoxicated by status, desperate for validation, blind to the possibility that the people she mocked might be her equals or her superiors. And so I made my choice. I would not confront her in anger. I would not scream, nor cry, nor plead for respect. No, I would wait. I would watch. I would let her arrogance ripen until it rotted on the vine. Because I knew something Jessica could never imagine the widow. She thought she humiliated the woman she called tasteless and cheap, was the same woman who signed her paycheck every 2 weeks. And one day soon she would find out the truth, not through whispered rumor or family gossip, but through the cold, undeniable weight of reality. That night I raised my glass toward Robert's photograph on the mantel. His navy uniform gleamed under the frame's glass, his smile captured forever. "Don't worry, my love," I whispered. "She thinks she humiliated me today. But tomorrow she'll discover who I really am, and when she does, she'll wish she had held her tongue." I drained the last sip of Bordeaux and let the silence of the apartment wrap around me like armor. The storm had only just begun. The Bordeaux lingered on my tongue, rich and bittersweet, as I set the empty glass aside. The night pressed in around me, quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the sigh of the sea breeze against the window pane. My neighbors believed I was settling into widowhood with quiet resignation, but in truth, I was preparing for battle. I rose from my chair and crossed the living room, my hand brushing the bookshelf that leaned slightly against the wall. To anyone else, it was nothing but a collection of weathered novels and family photo frames. But when I pressed the hidden latch, the shelf swung open on silent hinges, revealing a narrow passageway lit by the faint glow of recessed lights. Inside was the life no one knew I led. Filing cabinets lined the walls, filled with contracts, deeds, and financial statements that told the story of decades of labor and success. On the desk lay bound ledgers with embossed logos of the boutiques Robert and I had built from nothing. There in that hidden room, I was not the grieving widow with a rusted Ford and a leaky faucet. I was Margaret Coleman, co-founder of a fashion empire. I sat at the desk, sliding open a drawer to pull out a leather-bound planner. My fingers moved to the phone I kept in this office, the private line that none of my children even knew existed. With deliberate calm, I dialed the first number. George Miller came the familiar voice after 2 rings. "George, it's Margaret," I said softly, though the steel in my tone was unmistakable. There was a pause, then a sigh. "I was expecting your call. My condolences again." "Margaret, Robert was a great man." "He was," I replied, "and he would want me to handle this carefully. I need you to run a full financial check on Jessica Albright." George didn't sound surprised. He had known Robert and me long enough to recognize the tone I used when someone had crossed the line. "Give me 24 hours. "Thank you," I murmured, then ended the call. The next number I dialed belonged to Paula, my director of human resources. She had been with us for 15 years, meticulous and loyal. "Mrs. Coleman, She greeted her voice carrying both respect and sorrow. "Paula, I need every employee record on Jessica. Attendance, customer feedback, supervisor, notes, everything." Quietly. There was no hesitation. "Consider it done. By morning, you'll have it all." I leaned back in the leather chair, the weight of the day pressing against me. Jessica thought she had destroyed me with her venomous words at Robert's funeral. But in truth, she had opened the door to her own undoing. All I needed was patience and evidence. By the next evening, the reports lay spread across my desk like pieces of a puzzle. Paula had delivered everything: Jessica's tardiness logs, complaints from customers about her arrogance, even a supervisor's note describing her as dismissive and condescending. She had been late 12 times in the past 3 months. She had ignored 2 clients because she judged they couldn't afford the merchandise. And then came the details from George Details that nearly made me laugh aloud. Jessica was drowning in debt, over $50,000 in unpaid credit cards, a car loan on a vehicle far too flashy for her income, and most deliciously a pending mortgage application for a $250,000 house. The collateral, a promotion to management at the boutique, a promotion that did not exist. The irony was exquisite. She had built her future on lies about her job, her status, her worth. And all of it was about to collapse, not because I raised my voice, but because she had built her foundation on sand. I stared at the stack of papers, at the evidence of her vanity and deceit, and a slow, cold smile curved my lips. "She's done this to herself," I whispered into the silence. "She thinks she buried me today, but the truth is, she's the one digging her own grave." The clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking the passage of time. Outside, the waves crashed softly against the shore. Inside, I felt no grief, no weakness, only resolve. The next act of this play had already begun. A week slipped by like the tide, steady, inevitable. Each day, I studied the evidence George and Paula had gathered, committing every detail of Jessica's vanity and deceit to memory. I was patient. I was deliberate. And when the moment felt right, I chose to step into her world not as the grieving widow she mocked, but as a silent storm waiting to strike. On a bright Tuesday morning, I dressed in the plainest clothes I owned: a faded cardigan, a pair of sensible flats, a handbag so old the leather straps had begun to crack. I looked every bit the part Jessica believed me to be: an elderly woman surviving on scraps of pension, out of place in a temple of luxury. My Ford rattled into the boutique's parking lot, drawing little more than a disinterested glance from the valet. Perfect. The boutique gleamed like a palace inside marble floors polished to a mirror-shine racks of silk and satin glowing under warm, golden lights. Sales associates glided between clients, their voices hushed and professional. But then came Jessica. She spotted me near the entrance, and her smirk spread like oil on water. "Well, look who wandered in," she said, her voice pitched loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "Mother-in-law! What a surprise!" Her eyes swept over my clothes, dripping disdain. I smiled politely. I thought I might look around. Jessica tilted her head, mock concern etched into every line of her face. "Of course. But let's be realistic. With your budget, I'll show you something affordable." She led me past the sparkling gowns and exclusive collections, steering me toward the back corner. The clearance section. She plucked a silk scarf from a rack, waving it in front of me. $200 on sale. If you add a couple more, you might scrape together something decent. Though honestly, she leaned closer, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. "With $500, you'll barely leave here with dignity." Her laughter was soft but cruel, and I felt the eyes of another customer upon us. A woman in her 70s, elegant in a linen dress, her hair swept into a bun streaked silver. She frowned at Jessica, clearly offended by the tone. Later, I would learn her name, Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired professor from Havana, who had shopped in our boutiques for years. That day, she was just another witness to Jessica's arrogance. "I beg your pardon," Mrs. Rodriguez interjected, her accent lilting. "Is that how you treat your clients, by mocking their wallets?" Jessica stiffened, then flashed her most artificial smile. "Oh no, ma'am, of course not. This is my family. I was only teasing." But the professor's narrowed eyes told me she wasn't convinced. I let the silence linger, savoring the moment, then gave a small nod. "Thank you for your help, Jessica. I'll think about the scarf." Before she could retort, a voice called across the boutique floor. Diane, the floor supervisor, stood near the staircase. "Jessica, upstairs, please. Miss Coleman wants to see you now." Jessica blinked. "Miss Coleman?" "Yes," Diane said firmly. "The owner. She just arrived." I watched the color drain slightly from Jessica's face before she quickly recovered, smoothing her dress with trembling fingers. She turned to me with forced cheer. "Well, I have very important business. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back to help you stretch that budget." She winked, cruel and careless, then strutted toward the staircase, heels clicking a nervous rhythm. If only she knew. If only she had the faintest idea that the Miss Coleman waiting upstairs was not some distant executive, but the very woman she had humiliated at her father-in-law's funeral. The very woman she believed powerless, tasteless, invisible. I adjusted the strap of my worn handbag, my heart calm and steady. This was no longer about silence. It was about revelation. The stage was set, and the curtain was about to rise. Upstairs, the conference room was a glass-walled chamber overlooking the boutique floor. From my seat at the head of the polished mahogany table, I could see Jessica pause at the doorway, confusion flickering across her face. She expected to meet a distant executive, some faceless owner she could charm with a false smile. Instead, her eyes landed on me, her lips parted. For a heartbeat, silence. Then came the gasp. "Mother, you're Miss Coleman." I folded my hands on the table, steady and unshaken. "Please, Jessica, close the door." Her heels scraped against the marble as she stumbled inside, every ounce of confidence draining from her posture. She looked from me to Diane, the supervisor, then back again as though hoping someone would laugh and say it was all a misunderstanding. But no one laughed. The air was heavy with truth. "Sit," I said softly, but there was steel beneath my voice. She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair opposite mine, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't understand. All this time I interrupted you, thought I was a helpless widow, barely scraping by. And so you mocked me. At the funeral, in this store, in front of strangers. You assumed respect was something I could not afford." Her face paled. "I didn't mean I slid a folder across the table." Paula's meticulous reports spilled onto the polished wood attendance sheets, marked with tardiness, customer complaints, written in sharp cursive, even stills from security footage. Jessica's dismissive gestures, her rolling eyes, her phone in hand while clients waited. Evidence upon evidence, piece by damning piece. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through them. "This is exaggerated. People lie. Customers make things up. Then explain this." I pressed another sheet forward, the mortgage application George had uncovered. Her name scrawled across it, her bold claim that she was due for a promotion, her entire financial future hinging on a lie. Jessica's eyes darted frantically between the documents, her breath coming in short bursts. I only said that because I was sure I'd be promoted. Everyone says I'm the best employee here. You deserve nothing." I cut in my voice, slicing through her excuses. "You don't treat people with respect. You humiliate them. You decide their worth by the clothes they wear, by the car they drive. You humiliated me at my husband's funeral the day I laid Robert to rest. You turned my grief into your theater. And for that, Jessica, you deserve exactly what is coming." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. I need this job. We're drowning in debt." "David doesn't know. If you fire me," I opened another folder, this one containing the termination papers Paula had prepared. Slowly, deliberately, I signed my name in ink, the pen scratching across the page like a final verdict. Then I pushed it toward her. "Effective immediately," I said. "You no longer work here." Her sobs broke free, ragged and desperate. She fell to her knees, clutching at the edge of the table. "Margaret, please, for David's sake, for our marriage. I'll change. I swear I'll change. Just give me one more chance." Around us, the room had grown crowded. Diane stood silently at the door. Two associates lingered just outside their faces, pale with shock. The entire boutique seemed to be holding its breath. I stood gathering the reports back into the folder, my movements calm, precise. "You had your chance, Jessica. You had it every day you walked into this store. You had it at the funeral when you chose cruelty over compassion. You've shown the world who you are." Her sobs echoed through the glass walls, the sound of a woman watching her carefully constructed life collapse around her. And though my heart ached for the son who had chosen her, I felt no pity for her, only clarity, because justice, when it finally comes, does not need to shout. It speaks in signatures, in silence, and in the weight of consequences that cannot be undone. Jessica's sobs were still echoing in my ears when I returned home that evening. The silence of the apartment pressed against me heavier than it had in weeks. I knew this was only the first half of the storm. The second would arrive soon in the shape of my son. It didn't take long. At midnight, my doorbell rang sharp and insistent. When I opened the door, David stood there, his face pale and drawn eyes wild. Behind him, the hallway light cast him in shadow like a man already halfway lost. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "What did you do?" I stepped aside. "Come in, David." He stormed inside, hands balled into fists. "Jessica came home in tears. She said you fired her, that you humiliated her in front of everyone, and she said," he faltered, shaking his head as though the words were poison. "She said you own the boutique, that you've been lying to us for years. Is it true?" I met his gaze steadily. "Yes." The word landed like a slap. David staggered back, his mouth falling open. "So all this time, when Dad died, when we thought you were barely scraping by, you were sitting on a fortune. I wasn't sitting on it," I said quietly. "I was protecting it, protecting you, protecting your sister. Your father and I agreed long ago that wealth would never be your foundation. Character would be." David's laugh was harsh, broken. "Character. You think firing my wife in front of her co-workers builds my character. You destroyed her. You destroyed my marriage." The words cut, but I stood firm. I didn't destroy anything, David. Jessica destroyed herself with lies, arrogance, and cruelty. I only removed the mask. The door creaked open again, and Linda stepped inside. My daughter's eyes were blazing, her hands still holding the keys she had rushed over with. I heard shouting. "David, stop yelling at Mom." "Linda, stay out of this," David snapped. "No," she shot back, her voice firm. "I won't." "I was there at the funeral. Remember, I heard every word Jessica said to Mom. I saw how you stood there silent while your wife tore her apart in front of everyone. And now you're blaming Mom for finally standing up for herself." David's face reddened. "You don't understand. Marriage is about loyalty. She's my wife, and Mom is your mother." Linda's voice cracked with fury. "The woman who raised us, who sacrificed everything so we could grow up with dignity." Jessica spat on that. "And you let her." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. David's chest heaved, his eyes wet with anger and confusion. Linda stood trembling, her loyalty to me burning brighter than ever. And I stood between them, torn by grief and love, but resolute. "Enough," I said at last, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut the air. "This family has reached a breaking point. David, you have a choice to make." He turned to me, desperation etched across his face. "A choice, yes." I stepped closer, my hands steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "You can open your eyes and see Jessica for who she truly is, a liar, a manipulator, a woman who humiliated me on the day I buried your father. Or you can close your eyes and follow her into ruin, but you cannot do both. If you choose her lies, you will sink with her. If you choose the truth, you will find a way back." David's jaw tightened, his breath uneven. "You're asking me to divorce my wife." "I'm asking you," I said, "to decide whether you value truth over deceit, respect over humiliation, family over vanity." Linda reached for his arm, her voice gentler now. "David, please, don't let Jessica drag you down." The clock ticked on the wall, marking each second of the fragile silence that followed. My son stood between the two women who loved him most, one who had given him life and one who was trying to steal his soul. I saw the boy he had been standing lost in the middle of a childhood quarrel, desperate to please everyone. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man. And this time he would have to choose. The silence after my ultimatum clung to the walls like heavy fog. David stood frozen, torn between rage and shame, while Linda's hand trembled on his arm. I knew this fracture would not heal with words alone. It was time for truth, undeniable, overwhelming truth. "Both of you," I said, my voice low but steady, "come with me." I led them down the narrow hallway to the study. At first glance, it was nothing but shelves lined with books and a worn desk where bills and letters lay scattered. But when I pressed the hidden latch behind a row of Robert's old naval journals, the bookshelf swung open. David gasped. Linda covered her mouth. Behind the wall stretched the room I had kept locked for decades, polished cabinets, a mahogany desk, and a steel safe taller than either of my children. The faint scent of leather and cedar filled the air, mingling with the sterile gleam of glass cases holding files, deeds, and contracts. "This," I said, turning to face them, "is the truth I kept hidden." I spun the safe's dial, the familiar clicks echoing like a clock counting down to revelation. With a final turn, the door swung open. Inside lay rows of neatly stacked binders, a velvet pouch of keys and folders marked with embossed seals. I withdrew the ledgers and spread them across the desk. 17 boutiques across 6 states, I said, laying out the first stack. 3 textile factories, real estate holdings in Florida, New York, and California, and shares, blue-chip stocks, dividends reinvested for decades. David stumbled backward, his face drained of color. This can't be real." Linda's eyes brimmed with tears, not from greed, but from the weight of it all. "Mom," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us?" "Because," I said, my voice softening, "wealth is not a blessing if it corrupts. Your father and I wanted you to know humility, hard work, and respect for people, no matter their station. Money clouds judgment, and today you've both seen how easily blindness can destroy." I let the words settle before continuing. "But now you are old enough to know and old enough to be tested." I turned to David first. "You, my son. If you wish to inherit your share, you will not walk into this empire as its master. You will begin as a sales associate on the floor, wearing the uniform folding garments serving customers. For 5 years. Only then will you inherit the boutiques and factories." David's mouth opened then shut. His pride battled with his shame, but his silence told me the truth he understood. Then I looked at Linda. Her tears spilled freely now. "And you, my daughter, your path has always been in teaching, in nurturing. Your inheritance will come with one condition: you will establish a foundation, a scholarship fund for underprivileged children. A portion of every dollar you receive will go to them." Linda pressed a hand to her heart. "That's not a burden, Mom. That's an honor." I felt my throat tighten. For the first time in years, I saw in my children the reflection of Robert's wisdom and my own hope. David broken but still capable of redemption. Linda steadfast and compassionate. "You both must remember," I said, my voice trembling with conviction, "money is not power. Values are. If either of you forgets that the wealth will vanish as quickly as it came." David's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I thought you ruined my marriage," he whispered, "but now I see. Jessica ruined me, and you're giving me a chance to start again." Linda reached across the desk, taking his hand. For the first time in years, my children stood together, united not by lies or illusions, but by the truth of who we were. And as they wept, I felt Robert's presence in the room, proud, steady, reminding me that silence had protected us once, but now revelation would save us. The days that followed were heavy with silence broken only by the echo of consequences. Jessica's world collapsed faster than even I had imagined. Without her job, she had no income. The mortgage application she had pinned her dreams upon was denied. Creditors called at all hours, their voices sharp and merciless. The luxury handbags she flaunted on social media were quietly sold online one by one like trophies, stripped from a fallen queen. I heard whispers through Paula and Diane. Jessica had begged for work at smaller boutiques, even department stores, but her reputation followed her like a shadow. Employers spoke of unprofessional conduct, of attitude issues. No one wanted to hire a woman who mocked her own clients. The same arrogance that once filled her with pride now marked her as untouchable. Meanwhile, David was unraveling. I saw the storm inside him, the shame of silence at the funeral, the grief of betrayal, the bitterness of losing the woman he had once defended so blindly. For weeks, he wandered between guilt and anger, snapping at Linda, retreating into himself. But eventually he came to me. "Mom," he said one morning, standing in my doorway in jeans and a wrinkled shirt, his eyes raw with sleeplessness, "I want to start over. I want to earn it the way you asked." And so he did. At 35, my son put on the Navy uniform of a sales associate. He folded shirts, polished mirrors, greeted clients with the kind of respect his wife never had. Customers never knew he was the son of the owner, and I didn't allow him any privileges. He learned to bow his head when women twice his age complained about the hemline, to smile when someone dismissed him as just another clerk. At night, he came home exhausted but lighter, as though the burden of arrogance was finally lifting from his shoulders. Linda, on the other hand, embraced her inheritance with grace. Within 6 months, the Coleman Scholarship Fund opened its doors, offering tuition support for underprivileged children in Florida. Local newspapers ran stories praising her compassion. Photos of smiling children holding their first school books appeared in magazines alongside headlines that read, "From luxury to legacy, a family's wealth put to purpose." I watched her at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, her face glowing with pride, and I thought, this is what Robert and I dreamed of. Not just wealth, but worth. And me, I returned to my rhythms. Not the rhythms of secrecy, but of peace. One evening, I sat on the porch of my modest Florida home. The ocean breeze carried the salt of the Gulf air, and the cicadas hummed their summer song. In my hand was a glass of Bordeaux, deep red and alive with memory. I thought of Robert, his laugh, his steady hand on mine during the hard years, his whispered warnings, "Don't let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness, Margaret. When I'm gone, remember who you are." I lifted my glass toward the horizon where the sun melted into the waves, turning the water crimson. "Robert," I whispered, "I finally learned. I know now how to protect myself. And our children. They've learned too. David will never forget what silence cost him. Linda will carry forward the values we built together. And Jessica, well, she will live with the truth she tried so hard to bury." The tide rolled in, steady and eternal, carrying away the echoes of humiliation, leaving only the calm weight of justice. I smiled, not with triumph, but with peace. "Rest easy, my love. Our children will never forget the lesson of today." And as the stars began to rise, I felt Robert beside me, proud and present, in the quiet victory of a woman who had once been underestimated and who would never be underestimated again.